Thank you so much for joining me for today's webinar, Coping in a Crisis. So I'm Beth Wood. I'm one of the directors of Mind Fitness, and Mind Fitness work with organisations throughout the UK. And then we also work with the public, with individuals in public sessions and public events. So before I start, I'm just going to very quickly introduce you to some of our team. So this is Brian Cooley and Andy Barker. They are the other two directors of Mind Fitness. So Andy and I head up the training and the delivery of the Mind Fitness and mental health side of the operation, and Brian heads up the business guild side of our operation. And then we have our marketing team, our wonderful marketing team. So that is Iran and Erin and Jess. And then in addition to those, we also have a team of practitioners that are working in schools. We have a 3-year program funded by Children in Need, which is very dear to my heart. And then they work with us in all sorts of organisations. In 2018, we were commissioned by Pearson to write a book, Unlock You, which is essentially the Mind Fitness program that was published last year. And we're very happy that it's nominated for the Business Book of the Year award this year, which is lovely. And very exciting, we have just launched an app. So this is a free app, Tembo, and it's designed especially for people to help in the current situation. And we'll go through at the end the details of how you can get it. We really hope that everyone that's doing this webinar will sign up for the app. That would be absolutely brilliant. So, coping in a crisis. We've actually had a record number of people sign up for this webinar, which shows that a lot of people are struggling in the current situation, or at least want a few extra tools and techniques that they can use. So in this webinar, I'm going to give 3 main, easy to use, accessible techniques to bring down levels of stress and anxiety. And then at the end, I'll give 3 top tips as well. So the webinar itself lasts for 40 minutes, and then I'll stay online for another 20 minutes after that to answer any questions or have any comments that you have. So please do feel free to use the chat button through this webinar. You could use the chat button rather than the Q&A button, that would be brilliant. And then at the end, if you can stay on for the extra 20 minutes, please do so, and I'll go through some of what you've written down through the chat. If by any chance you're near enough to grab a pen and a piece of paper, that would be brilliant, as there'll be just one place in the webinar where I'll ask you to write something down. So, what is stress? We like to use a definition that is by Professor Stephen Palmer, and that is that stress occurs when perceived pressure exceeds your perceived ability to cope. So just have a moment to think about that. Perceived pressure exceeds perceived ability to cope. And that's incredibly important. It's been shown in studies that if we believe that we do have the tools and techniques to cope in a situation, then we probably will. It's a little bit like the very old Henry Ford quote, if anyone remembers that, which is, if you think you can do a thing or you think you can't, you're probably right. So giving ourselves those tools and techniques is really, really important. So what causes us then to be stressed? During this webinar, I'm going to be talking just a little bit about the science as we go along. So everything that Mind Fitness does is based in science, neuroscience. And we found that if we tell people just a little bit about the science, then it builds the commitment, if people understand what the exercises are for and why they work. So I'm going to talk just for a couple of minutes about the brain. This is why we get stressed. If you went into your brain through the ears and through the eyes, you'd come to 2 small almond-shaped pieces, one each side, called the amygdala. And what the amygdala does most of the time is it passes information up to the prefrontal cortex. That's our higher thinking brain. But in times of danger or perceived danger, that word again, what it does instead is it instigates our fight or flight response, sometimes called our stress response. So I'm sure that everyone here has known the fight or flight response. You'll know what that feels like. Your heart starts to beat really, really fast, and your body floods through with adrenaline. And that adrenaline has been incredibly important in a historical evolutionary sense. It's what's kept us survival instinct as a species, because it's given us enough strength to fight the wildebeest if we needed to, or to run away from it, probably faster than we've ever done before. But what's really key to remember is that once the amygdala kicks in our fight or flight response, it doesn't pass any information up to the prefrontal cortex. No higher thinking can go on at that point. So in our modern day life, our stressful situations are likely to be meetings or interviews or homeschooling the kids. And whatever that is, we need to be thinking clearly. But from the moment that we get stressed and our fight or flight response kicks in, then we simply can't. So it's really important that we have good tools and techniques that we can use as quickly as possible to get ourselves out of fight or flight and get back to a place where we can think clearly. Which brings us to the first of our techniques. So our first technique is about bringing our attention to the present moment using mindfulness. So I think it's likely that a lot of the people attending this webinar, a lot of you will have used mindfulness before. So our definition of mindfulness is bringing our attention to the present moment in order to experience life more clearly and more fully, more clearly and more fully. And it's a brilliant time to be using mindfulness because we know now that it works scientifically. We can use neuroscience to see how it's working. If you put somebody through an MRI scanner, you can see exactly what the benefits of mindfulness are. And some of the benefits that have come out most strongly in the studies have been, as well as bringing down, as we've said, the level of stress or anxiety, but also to help build focus and attention, concentration, and even motivation. Really, really important. So we often think of mindfulness practice as being attached or focused on the breath. And obviously quite a lot of it is. Our breath will always bring us to the present moment. We can only breathe in the present. But actually, that's true also for any of our senses. We can only see in the present, we can only hear in the present, smell, touch, or taste in the present. So any one of those senses will work equally as well in terms of bringing us to the present. So a lot of our mind fitness exercises span that range of all of the senses. If you go into the app Tembo, you'll find exercises that are very wide ranging so that you can find the kind of exercises that work best for you. And we also use an awful lot of exercises that use imagination, creative thinking. And I'll come back right near the end of this webinar to explain why that is so important. So, tiny bit of science. We have about 60,000 thoughts a day, only 5% of which are spent on the task in hand, which is pretty astonishing. So the rest of our thoughts we kind of think of as noise, and there's lots of different kinds of noise. So past noise might be dwelling on the past, even though we can do nothing about changing the situation. Future noise might be thinking about the potential futures. Obviously, we don't know the real future, but making up mental movies that usually will build through to a worst case scenario. So mindfulness practice can help us to settle those thoughts. If we think about our brain being like a snow globe, as you can see on the screen at the moment, the noise can seem overwhelming, particularly in a stressful situation as we're finding ourselves in at the moment. And when we practice mindfulness, it not only brings us out of fight or flight, but it allows those thoughts to settle as the snow would on that snow globe if we stop shaking it. So I'm going to do a mindfulness exercise with you now, which is called image breathing. One of our favorite exercises. So before we start, I'd like you just to watch the waves on the screen just for a moment. We often find that any connection with nature and the natural world will cause us to rest for a moment. And now I'd like you to close your eyes. Make sure you're comfortable. And while we're doing this exercise, I'd like you to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. And if any other thoughts come into your mind at any time, any invading thoughts, don't worry about it. Just let them gently drift away and bring your attention back to the image that I'm going to ask you to think about. So I'd like you to imagine that you're standing on the beach and you're looking out towards the sea. And just for a moment, feel the release, the rest that comes from the sense of space, being able to see to the horizon. It's something that a lot of us are really missing at the moment. And now, as you breathe in, I'd like you to imagine that the waves are coming up towards you on the beach. And as you breathe out, I'd like you to imagine that you're using your breath to push the water back into the ocean, the wave rejoining the ocean. Get ready, and breath in, and the wave comes towards you. Breath out, using your breath to push the wave back towards the ocean. Breath in, and breath out. Breath in, and breath out. Breath in, and breath out. And now, keeping that nice sense of relaxation, just open your eyes and come back into the present moment. So what's amazing is it only takes 4 breaths worth to bring down your heart rate and also to bring down the level of your stress hormone, cortisol. And it's almost no times in life do we not have enough time just to give ourselves 4 breaths worth to bring ourselves back into the present moment and get ourselves into a place where we can think clearly. So that's mindfulness. But just before we move on to our second technique, I'd like to just give you one more fact. So on your screen now is a gazelle. And if a gazelle manages to outrun a lion or another predator in the savannah, then the second that it's fine, literally nanosecond, the cortisol level goes right back to down as it was before, and it begins to graze. With human beings, that doesn't happen. What happens with human beings is we have one stressful situation and our cortisol level rises a little bit, and it doesn't go back down. It stays there or thereabouts. And then another stressful situation comes and it builds, and another, and it builds again, until our cortisol levels reach the state which has really serious mental and physical repercussions. An awful lot of physical illnesses are linked to high cortisol levels. So it's really important that we have the kind of techniques, tools and techniques in order to bring down our cortisol level every day. So we always think of pushing the clear button. So if you're working from home, it might be you push the clear button when you go from your working life into your home life. Or if you're moving between different tasks, or even if you're moving from one room to the next, just find as many times as you can to push that clear button through the day. So on to our second technique, which is reframing negative thoughts and beliefs. So to give you a tiny bit of science first, what we're going to be doing is rewiring the brain, essentially. And that sounds like it would be very difficult, and it isn't. So scientists have known for about the last 20-25 years that it's possible to change our brain right until the end of our lives. It used to be thought that you couldn't once you became an adult. So we now know that by building new neural pathways, every time we have a new thought, we can continue to change the way we think until the end of our lives. So that means that we can choose what we decide to think about. We can decide to change the way that we think about ourselves and the world around us using neuroplasticity, the way that our brain can change. If you want to look it up afterwards, have a look at neuroplasticity. And by changing the way we think, we will change the way we feel. And this is roughly how it works. So we are essentially an organic computer. We have about 100,000 chemical reactions every second. And what happens is an emotion is induced by a chemical, or usually a compound of chemicals, washing through our body. So we've already talked about cortisol, the stress hormone. We have a whole range, for example, of happiness hormones. So dopamine is the chemical that's usually associated with sort of spiky highs, say the anticipation of eating a bar of chocolate, or serotonin, which is the sort of contentment high, or say oxytocin, which is sometimes referred to as the cuddle hormone, because you get that if you stroke a pet or if you hug another human being. Again, something that some of us are missing just at the moment. So when we change the way we think, what happens is that we send a whole different range of chemicals through our body. So we can move from stress chemicals going through our body to happiness chemicals going through our body. So not only will we feel an awful lot less anxiety, but our whole sense of well-being and happiness will massively improve, which is really important. So how do we reframe those negative thoughts and beliefs? So the basic premise is this, that our stress and disturbance does not come from the situation or event, but from our response to that situation. So just have a moment to look at that. It doesn't come from the situation itself, but from the way that we respond to that situation. So I know that when I first started the whole Mind Fitness journey, that was one of the most profound aha moments for me. And I still find it an incredibly empowering statement, because it means that we can choose the way that we respond to any belief. And we know that that statement is true because of something called the 100-person rule. So when we're doing courses, we usually use the example of either 100 people who'd just been divorced or 100 people who'd just been made redundant. So if you have 100 people and they've all just been made redundant, no two people will have the same reaction. So you might have one person, for example, who's absolutely over the moon because it means that they can use their redundancy money to set up their own company, something that has real meaning for them, through to somebody for whom it is absolutely the end of the world and they're totally convinced that they're going to lose their house and their family and everything is gone. And of course, everything in the middle. To use an example from the current corona situation, and I absolutely understand that circumstances might be different. For example, whether or not you have an elderly relative that you're worried about, whether you have a job that's secure or insecure, or whether you have a garden. But actually, our responses are not being determined by those circumstances. And we can see that that's true by the way that the National Health Service frontline workers are responding. So many of them are going through the most difficult situation and circumstances that we can imagine. Well, most of us can't imagine. And yet they're demonstrating the most incredible resilience. That's because of their belief about the situation, the way that they view the situation. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So when we're looking to reframe our beliefs, we use something called the ABC. And the ABC is a really simple way at looking about what we need to do to change the situation. So the A stands for adversity, and the B stands for belief, and the C stands for consequence. A, adversity, there we are, B, belief, and C, consequence. And generally in life, we think that it's the A, the situation, that leads directly to the consequence. You'll often hear people say, he shouted at me and made me cry, or it made me angry. But actually not everyone that gets shouted at would cry. So to give an example from my own life, I work a lot with people with quite profound disabilities and high level anxiety. And if one of them shouted at me, there's not a chance that it would make me cry, because I would know absolutely that it wasn't meant intentionally or maliciously, so it wouldn't make me cry. So we can see that that's because my belief is such that it determines the consequence. It's never the A that leads to the C, it's the B that leads to the C. So by changing the belief that we have about a situation, we can change the consequence. So to go back to the National Health Service workers, the reason that they have this incredibly resilient response is because of their profound belief that what they're doing is of immense value, and that they believe so strongly in helping all of us to get better from the coronavirus. Absolutely important. And one of the ways that we can help to reframe these beliefs is by lightening the pressure that we place upon ourselves. We generally put an awful lot of pressure on ourselves by placing demands. So the first thing we actually have to do is to think about what is and isn't in our control. So when we're placing demands, we use language like must, have to, and should. And a lot of that is because we haven't thought about whether changing something is in our control or if it's not. So we can only ever change what is within our control. If something isn't within our control, we have to accept it. We might not approve of it, whatever it is, but we have to accept it. So it's coming away from this language of must, should, have to. So to give a current example, I've heard a lot of people say this lockdown must end by the end of May. And obviously that's not within our control. So if we were going to reframe that into a preference, the format of a preference might be something like, I would prefer that ... but ... So in that situation, it might be something like, I would prefer that the lockdown would end at the end of May, but I accept that the National Health Service workers are doing all that they can to get people as fast as they can and bring us out of lockdown with the help of lots of other people, politicians and everybody else. So this box of chocolates that's just come up on the screen is my reminder to you to use preferences as often as you can over the next few weeks. So when I first started to do this, I literally went around the house using it all the time. Anything small, it doesn't matter. Just try and get your brain used to working in preferences. So this one might be, I would prefer that my lovely husband had not just eaten the last of the chocolates. Or it might be, I would prefer that my daughter's school had given us parents' lessons before expecting us to help with the maths. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Just get your brain as used as you can to using preferences. And once that becomes automatic, you'll take a huge amount of pressure off yourself, and the way that you see the world around you really starts to change. It changes your beliefs, and that changes your consequence. So we finished 2 of the techniques. The first one, mindfulness, and the second one, reframing negative thoughts and beliefs. And we're going to move on now to our third technique, which is about reducing awfulizing. So that might not be a word that you've come across before. Sometimes it's called catastrophizing. So we all have a tendency to see things as more awful than they are. Now, I totally understand that in the current situation, there will be some things that are happening very close to us that are genuinely serious, very distressing. But there will also be a lot of trivial problems around the edges of that we're giving an awful lot more of our time and our anxiety to than they actually require. So this exercise is really about saying, how awful is it really? It's about reframing our essential perceptions about any situation. And we say, how awful is it on a scale of 1 to 10? So to give an example, if I've lost my phone or I miss a meeting, that can seem absolutely like the end of the world, a 9 or a 10. But if you set that against the life or death situations that are happening literally around us at the moment, then it's obviously a 2 or a 3. It's about bringing our perceptions down in the situation. So I would like you now to take that piece of piece of paper and the pen, if you have it, and to write down one problem that you have at the moment or that you've had fairly recently. And once you've done that, I'd like you to write at the next of it, just the numbers for the minute, 1 to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And after this webinar finishes, I'd love you to go through and just write a response for the same problem for each one of those numbers. So a number 1 is a very low level response, it's almost fine, through to a number 10 response, which is absolutely the end of the world. So 1 low level response through to 10, a massively high level response, where you're building it into the worst case scenario. So to give one more example, it might be that my football team has just been relegated. So a number 1 response might be, well, they've been in the Premier League for a very long time, so it was probably bound to happen, through to a number 10 response where I'm literally losing it and saying that all sorts of nasty things ought to be done to the manager. So it is largely about bringing down the numbers. So in Mind Fitness, we often talk about not sweating the small stuff. We say, don't sweat the small stuff. There's enough big stuff to bring our rational attention to without focusing on all the small stuff that's going on. Try and make sure that we bring those numbers down. But as well as being about bringing the numbers down, it's actually about being in control of the response that you have to any situation. So one of the things that I do every single day, I do a lot of the Mind Fitness stuff every day, but this is something that I never miss, is I turn on the television. So on your screen now, you've got a kind of mixture, collage of all sorts of soap operas with their very, very dramatic situations. And I literally just see whatever situation is on the television and I write it down. And then I give a response to it as if it's happening to me, from numbers 1 through to 10, or if I'm really short time, just 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. And that gives my brain practice at responding in different ways to the situation. And that's incredibly important because it puts us back in control. If we believe that we're in control of our response to a situation. So there's an awful lot of science which says that our confidence, but actually more than that, our resilience depends hugely on whether we believe that in a difficult situation, we would be able to cope. So doing this exercise is absolutely vital. Try and make sure that you spend a little bit of time each day just getting your brain used to responding in different ways to different situations. So that's the end of our 3 main techniques. And I'm going to go through now 3 top tips. But before we do that, I'm just going to recap on what we've done. So the first one was practicing mindfulness. And I know that an awful lot of people at the moment are finding that it really helps to do it last thing at night. So especially as lots of people are having trouble sleeping at the moment. The second one was reframing unhelpful beliefs. Just go round doing I would prefer that as many times as you can. And the last one is reducing the awfulizing. So, you know, you'll never get rid of it completely, but if you can bring it down as much as you can, that would really, really help the stress levels. And it's worth just saying one more thing there, which is that the way that our brain works, we obviously at any given time, we have a series of problems or worries, and they're not all of equal value. There'll be some that are much more urgent and important than others, but the way our brain works is it pulls up the numbers of the lesser problems up to the numbers of the more serious ones. And that's why we can sometimes feel like we're being overwhelmed by the number of things that are happening to us at the same time, or even that something very trivial is the final straw, the only thing that we can focus on at that moment. So all of the techniques that we've done today will help us to separate those problems and also to prioritize them so that we know what it is important that we actually give our rational attention to. So we're moving now into our 3 top tips. And our first top tip is something that we call the stress container. So the stress container is metaphorical, and it's, when we say it, we're really talking about how much stress we can cope with before it starts overspilling and causing real problems. So as you can see, there's stress coming in at the top. And perhaps again at the end of this webinar, you might want to just make a note of what stress is coming in for you at the moment. And then at the bottom, you can see the tap. And that's how we let the stress out. That's all of our helpful, healthy coping mechanisms. So all of the things that we've said today, for example, would be healthy coping mechanisms, but also it might be exercising, very important, good nutrition, having enough sleep, connecting with other people, being creative. So all of those things are healthy coping mechanisms. And what's really important is that we always make sure that we're letting enough out at the tap, at the bottom, so that whatever's coming in from the top has somewhere to go. So in a very stressful situation, which many of us are finding at the moment, we need to open that tap a lot more than we would otherwise do. It's really important. There might also be a tap on the other side for some people, probably most of us, which is our less healthy coping mechanisms, which might be things like chocolate and alcohol. Actually, they don't do a huge amount in terms of getting rid of the stress. So it's really important to concentrate on the healthy ones as much as you possibly can. And in addition, all of the Mind Fitness techniques will help to enlarge the stress container. And that means you'll have just a little bit of contingency so that if an unexpected stressful situation comes along, you've got a little bit of time while the additional stress is coming down before you sort of motivate that opening the tap a little bit more often than you would normally do. So all of the Mind Fitness techniques will help in that way. So our second top tip is to create a schedule. So I don't know if people like Tim Peake as much as I do, the British astronaut, but he said last week, and I thought this was fantastic, that a schedule is your best friend in times of adversity and isolation. And obviously he's gone through a lot of isolation when going up to the space station, and he really knows what he's talking about. But I have definitely found when I've been coaching people over the last few weeks that the thing that has helped so much, perhaps more than anything else, is for people to create a schedule for themselves and to stick to it as much as you possibly can. And if you're working from home, make sure that you're still putting in enough things which you enjoy doing each day. Make sure you're building in times to connect with other people, incredibly important. And as we said earlier, if you can, times to be creative. So in terms of the science, building neural pathways between your imagination and your higher thinking brain is just about the best thing that you can do for positive mental health. So if you can be creative through the day, absolutely brilliant. And I would also say, try and limit the amount of time that you listen to news and stories about the coronavirus. So, you know, our brains are not programmed to be 24/7 in any situation. Even before the coronavirus, it was one of the reasons why scientists were talking about the epidemic of anxiety and stress. We're just not made that way. But it's even worse if what we're doing 24/7 is listening to negative stories. So first of all, make sure that the stories that you're getting, the news is accurate. A lot of the fake news stories have been causing real anxiety. And then I would say limit yourself to listening to them perhaps once or twice a day. Now, obviously, we need to know what's going on. We really want to at the moment, but that doesn't have to be all the time. Just make sure you've got once or twice a day where you're turning on the news and getting back up to date. And our third top tip for today is gratitude, practicing gratitude. And I know that that feels difficult for people in a difficult situation, but that is actually the time when it is most important. So I had the absolute honour in 2012 of meeting Terry Waite, who some of you will remember was captured and held hostage in the Lebanon. And he said, very movingly, that it was hope and gratitude that kept him going through the darkest hours. And I absolutely believe that that's the case. In the times when we feel the worst, it's really important that we can focus on something for which we can be grateful, however small that might be at the time. In terms of the science, our brain cannot feel gratitude and think a negative thought at the same time. So if nothing else is working, then thinking about something for which you are profoundly and genuinely grateful will dispel the negative. So mindfulness practitioners often keep a gratitude journal. So I keep a journal, and every morning I write just 3 general things that I'm grateful for. And at the end of each day, I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for from that day. And a lot of people do something like that. Thinking about something you're grateful for will also help a lot of people to get to sleep. And in terms of the whole mind fitness process, I guess we're thinking about trying to look at the world in terms of glass half full rather than glass half empty. And I would say that nothing more than gratitude will help to build that glass to be fuller and fuller. And you probably won't even notice that it's happening. So gratitude, incredibly important. Which brings us almost a full circle, because I want to thank you for staying with us for the whole of the webinar. So I will be staying on to do the Q&A after this, but for those of you who can't stay for the Q&A, I'm just going to show you a slide first, which has the details of all of our Mind Fitness community. So we have a Facebook page, as you can see. Please do follow us on Facebook. The Facebook page has a lot of free resources. Our website address is there. Again, there's a huge amount of free resources on the website, lots of videos and articles. And then at the top, there is Tembo, and that's the app that I've talked about a few times as we've gone through the webinar. So you don't download it from the App Store. What you do is you just go onto your browser and just type usetembo.app and then sign in, and then it works as any other app. And we really do hope that it's absolutely free, that everyone will download Tembo, because there's such a huge range of resources that will be able to help you with whatever it is that you're struggling with. And I had a couple of people during the week ask if I could recommend books through this webinar, but actually that would take a lot of time. So if you go to the usetembo.app and then click onto the resources, there are a whole reading list there of people that want to read more and follow up on this. So that's all of the Mind Fitness community. And we have another webinar coming up on June the 1st, which is Staying Positive, that again we very much hope that you'll come to. By registering today for today's webinar, you will get a recorded version of this, which is partly so that you can use it for the exercises, but also because we had a few key workers who wanted to do the webinar today but weren't able to come at 4 o'clock. So everyone who has registered will get a recording of the webinar, and you'll get a link so that you can come and join us for the next webinar, Staying Positive. So for those of you who have to go now, thank you so much for coming to this webinar and for staying through it. Make sure you look after yourself and those that you care about, and stay safe. And I will now open up the chat and have a look at any questions that have come in. I have a question here which says, which is actually asking if any of the information will be available to view again so that they can go back over one or two bits. So yes, you will be given a recording and you'll be able to go through the whole of the webinar again. There's a couple more coming in here now. So someone has asked if how they would know if they were in fight or flight, which is actually a very good question. So our stress response is incredibly individual in a physiological sense. So whenever I get stressed, the first thing that I will notice is absolutely in the gut. But when we've been working with people, we've had people who feel a tightness of the chest, or pulsing at the temples, or even a dry mouth. Most people feel the heart racing, but not everybody. So I would say what's really important is that you get to identify your own stress response, how that works for you, so that as soon as you feel those symptoms, that you can start to do an exercise. And remember that it's all about the practice. You build new neural pathways, and the more you practice that and it becomes your habitual response, then the better that it works for you. So I've been doing this for such a long time now that I can't actually remember the last time I went into fight or flight, because I will go into one of the exercises, or I will instinctively now bring down the stress level very, very quickly. So the more you can identify your own stress responses and start as soon as you can to do an exercise, the better. I'm going to have a look now at the so yes, I've had another question about where the books can be found. On the book list can be found on Tembo. So you download the app, and then once you've downloaded the app, which is usetembo.app, you go to the resources section, and there's a lot of books and other courses listed there. So I've got somebody here who's saying that getting a structured schedule feels very, very difficult due to lockdown. Is it normal to feel like this? So absolutely yes, it absolutely is. So I would say, you know, getting motivated is one of the things that will come from the schedule, but it will take a little bit of time for you to feel it. So what I've been doing with people over the last few weeks is I've been building a schedule around several things that they do anyway, so that it doesn't feel too much like jumping into the unknown. There's enough of that going on at the moment. So try and work it so that you're getting 8 hours sleep, and try and work it around the times that you normally go up and normally go to bed. Anything that has to be in at the same time each day, when you like to eat, those kind of things. And then yes, put in the things that you have to do, whether that's homeschooling the kids, or the chores, the household chores that you mention, or any work for some people, and making sure that you put in the nice things as well, the things that you'll have something to look forward to, is really important. And then I would say stick to it. however hard it is, for a week, and then look at it again. And if you need to make any changes, make any changes. But generally, you know, if once you've gone through those first few days, the motivation and the energy will start to come back. Obviously, physical exercise is brilliant in terms of getting the motivation and energy levels as well, if you can. And I know not everyone can do this, but if you can step outside and get some fresh air, that also will help us. Being close to nature affects our brain patterns for about 7 or 8 hours. So it's an incredibly validating thing to do if we possibly can. Okay, so I'm having another look to see. Okay, I've had 2 people say that they're actually worried about what will happen after lockdown. I'm not sure if that's in terms of the general situation, or so certainly I would say that we become institutionalized incredibly quickly. And I would say that in the same way that we've had to make an effort to get used to this situation of being in lockdown, it's likely that we'll have to make the same effort again when we come out of lockdown. And don't punish yourself. You know, that's the absolutely most important thing. You know, accept that some things are going to feel difficult again for a little while. And we have to get back used to the new situation. And it's likely, because the coming out of lockdown is going to be a gradual thing, that is going to have to be something that we do on an ongoing basis. We accept the next situation, we get used to it, we do our best, it might not be perfect, and then we accept the next one going forward. Okay, I'm having another look at questions. So someone has asked, how many problems should you deal with at any given time? So that's a difficult question, because it depends on the scale of the problems and the amount of resources that you have available to deal with them. But I would generally say don't try and look at more than 3 things at any given time. Make sure that you're looking at the ones first that need most attention. It's very easy, as we've said earlier, to convince ourselves that the smaller problems are where our focus should be. There's actually a very good exercise on the app. If you go into the exercise hub on the Tembo app, called Diamond 9, and that should help you to prioritize which problem to focus on, and then give ways that you can look at dealing rationally with the ones that most need it. I've got a couple more questions. So I've actually had quite a few people asking more or less the same thing, which is how to deal with children who are getting extraordinarily bored, how to deal with children in terms of getting them out of bed in the morning, and how to not get cross with children. So I would say, you know, they're probably slightly different, but in terms of a schedule, you know, as much as you can share the family schedule, that would be great. Try not to impose it on anybody, children or adult. You know, try and make sure that it's designed collectively, so that you've got a little bit more buy-in to what that schedule is. Try and make sure that in the same way you're giving other people things for them to look forward to. You know, maintaining relationships in this situation is never going to be easy. You know, you're on top of each other. For a lot of people in a confined space, you're the only physical beings that you're seeing. A lot of those things are going to be causing stress and pressure. and it's very easy to take things personally in those situations. So as much as you can, you know, make sure that you stand back from the situation and just do a quick exercise. Give yourself the 4 breaths before you respond to any situation. It's very easy for things to spiral out of control. Remember, you know, you can choose how you respond to any situation. So in terms of relationships with children or partners or anybody else, just try and make sure that you're being as kind to each other as possible, listening to what's there. It's very easy to imagine that people are attacking us when perhaps they're not. They're just feeling in an agitated state for a number of very good reasons. So the more that we can be understanding and compassionate, the better. Very interestingly, in terms of the science, this is one of my the bits that I love best, is that an act of compassion or kindness will actually release more dopamine, our happiness chemical, than the anticipation of a bar of chocolate or pretty nearly anything else. So if we can, and I know it's hard, but if we can practice that compassion and kindness as much as is humanly possible, then it will make us feel better as well. So I think I've gone through most of the problems here. If you have any other questions that you think about that you haven't asked here, please do email. So that's at info@mindfitness.training. And as we said, take care of yourself and each other and stay safe. Thank you.